So do you want to live in the system where you choose for yourself?
No one would believe that he would succeed in life.
Socialists murdering people? Is that new?
No, please, next question.
Really?
How do we deal with inequality?
Capitalism. Spoiler.
Free market is a ultimate cure, is a panacea.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's really amazing that you have found time, and specifically nowadays, to discuss such an important issue. But before we move on, before we proceed with the debate, I have a simple question to ask you. Why are we even here? My rationale is simple. I think this debate and this debate that has been going on for decades now, it's very important and it's crucial for our lives. If you're a Bulgarian, if you're an international, it doesn't matter. This debate still shapes your life. It dominates the healthcare system, all the other aspects of your life, your job opportunities afterwards. So I personally think this is very important, and this is why we are here right now. A few more topics. The support for capitalism has been declining over the past decade, especially among young adults. And according to some statistics, approximately 20% of all professors in the American universities describe themselves as socialist or Marxist or radical or activist. Despite that, capitalism over the past few decades has been shown to have a good success in terms of economical growth. And we'll study together different arguments that go for and against that. We're in Bulgaria right now, and this country specifically has not learned the lesson of socialism and capitalism from the books, but it has underwent a serious change. And I think this is exactly the reason we're conducting it right now, and it's extremely important to have a unique debate specifically in Bulgaria. Before we get into it, I would ask you to do one thing. On the screen now, you see a QR code. Please scan it if you haven't done so far. It has just a few questions. Basically, you can answer what side are you supporting right now, and then you have another QR code at the end of the debate. We'll see whether some of the opinions of yours has changed. It's gonna take 30 seconds max. Without further ado, let me present the debaters. On the socialist side, we have Kalina Dimova, who is majoring in political science, European studies, and minoring in philosophy. Please, a big round of applause. We have Professor Vucci, professor of philosophy at AUBG. Please, a big round of applause. Defending the capitalist side, we have Yegor Vasilyev, majoring in economics and political science. And Professor Ilya Levin, who is a professor of political science at AUBG. All right, let me just quickly introduce you to the structure of the debate. It's going to be quick, and then we can start. We have 6 sections. We start with opening statements from both sides. Each debater gets their say uninterrupted. Then we move into initial responses, where they can react directly to each other. After that, the floor opens up for open debate, free discussion, direct confrontation, and real arguments. Then the professors step in. They bring in a different layer, academic depth, historical context, things the students might not have covered. After that, it is your turn. Audience Q&A, where you can challenge either side directly. And we close the final statements from both of the sides. I want to remind you that we have debate, which means we keep it all respectful. I know you will, I know the debaters will. And without further ado, let's start. All right, a couple of slides. Next one, yeah. All right, we start with the capitalist side. Yegor, you have a timer right over there. As soon as you're ready, you can start.
Okay, so capitalism, as we know, is a lot of thinks it's a very broad concept, and I want to narrow it down. Capitalism that I will be talking about today, it is an economic system with private ownership of means of production, voluntary exchange between free individuals in the market, decentralized coordination of production and consumption through prices, freedom to profit in this market, and of course protection of property rights for what you own. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that free market is a ultimate cure, is a panacea. I'm saying that free market, constrained by the rule of law, consistently outperforms every known alternative at creating prosperity, innovation, and societal stability. So private ownership is like simple. When people own the means of production, they have an incentive to bear the cost if they waste the resources. They have an incentive to maintain and improve and use those resources productively. So voluntary exchange, this means that the trade happens between individuals only if both individuals are interested in the trade. And if somebody decides not to do it, it is not happening. Also, the decentralized coordination happens through prices. So prices form, they contain a huge dispersed information about demand, scarcity of different resources, and how to produce them. So they coordinate the market much better than any other authority would. Also, we need to understand that profit is not a moral flaw. We all have a right to benefit from what we are doing. And of course, the most important thing here is property that is protected by the rights of the law, so that one person cannot get benefits at the cost of another person. So what I advocate for here is a democratic, market liberal capitalism with a limited, disciplined safety net from the government. So this is a kind of a balance between free market and essential state support to those people who are in need. And we need to understand that markets, prices, and competition in this system do the heavy lifting, and this is where the state helps those people who are in need, as I said earlier. So examples of such would be Singapore, which is a very successful market liberal capitalist economy. It has strong property rights and an open trade between individuals, mandatory medical savings, and targeted subsidies to the people who cannot cover their own healthcare. So prices and competition here in the market of healthcare and education and other markets is preserved. There is an incentive to attract more and more customers. Another example that I want to talk about today is United States. Of course, this is the pillar of the capitalism well known to the world. And in sectors where the markets operate somewhat freely in the United States, this is the most tech, advanced medicine, high-end services, and we see that capitalism in these spheres delivers rapid innovation, lower prices, and of course expanded choice. And because of capitalism, I just had recently had a surgery on my knee, and I was able to choose where to do it, what I want to do with my knee because of the capitalism, because I was offered options that I can pay for. The last example that I will touch today is Scandinavian economies. So these countries combine welfare systems with high economic freedom. So they are protecting property rights, supporting trade. They don't have a minimal wage in their market, but they also help with healthcare. Their welfare system rests on productive capitalist foundation in that sense. So in my speech today, and the whole debate from my side today is balancing the state and the market. The goal is not the no state at all and not the state in common, but a combination of each. So prices, competition, and entrepreneurship between people, they coordinate economic life, economic activity, while there's also a safety net who protects the vulnerable. I believe that support that these people get must preserve incentive to work, save, and innovate, not undermine them. So we all care about healthcare, education, and security. The question is how to achieve it affordably, effectively, and sustainably. So capitalism that is shaped by Singapore, the United States, and the Scandinavian economies with their open market, this, what I believe, offers a stronger, more resilient model than just expanding state to replace the whole market system.
Thank you, Igor. Kalina, when you're ready, please start with the opening statement.
Ready? I thought that I would be arguing against limited government, but I guess we will both be basically arguing for a mixed system here. I will be arguing for a bit more of a leftist approach for the welfare state, which is usually associated with social democracies. I'm not going to argue for the real socialism that has been tried in many countries and has damaged humanity overall. I will be basing my arguments on two philosophers, Amitai Etzioni, who is a communitarian, and John Rawls, who is a contractarian. Why the welfare state? Why not let capitalism run everything? Why do we need regulation? Why do we need the state to limit the freedom of individuals and businesses? It's very simple, because power can be abused, and it is abused when it is achieved. And we have seen that. Igor mentioned that we can use a safety net, which can exist in a capitalist system. However, we are missing the big elephant in the room, which is inequality. How do we deal with inequality in a capitalist system? John Rawls actually gives a very good example, which I would ask all of you to think about. He calls it the veil of ignorance. He talks about a state in which a human being is put before being born, in which he has consciousness, but he does not know in which point of a system he's going to be in. He doesn't know what class he's going to end up in. He does not know what socioeconomic status he's going to have, what parents he's going to have, what country he's going to be born in. He's not capable of choosing. So if you are in that state, what type of system would you choose? Would you choose a capitalist one, or would you choose a welfare one in which you know that you will be taken care of, even if you're disadvantaged, not by your own will? And by that we mean inequalities such as being diseases, socioeconomic status, and other things which are out of our control basically when we were born. We don't choose them, they just happen. The other one is Amitai Etzioni, who speaks of two forces, centrifugal and centrifugal forces. He explains it in very simple terms. Imagine that you have one force that pushes you away from other individuals and makes you freer and more entrepreneurial, if you wish, and another force which binds you with other people. And we're not talking about extreme collectivism here. We're talking about the evolutionary need of people to be social, to connect with each other, to take care of each other, to take care of their sick, to take care of their less advantaged. These are all things that make us different from animals. We are conceptual thinkers, and we can think in abstract terms. And the abstract term here is, how do you deal with basic inequalities between human beings? So the ideas that Igor is presenting are very tempting and very great. And capitalism has given the world a lot of good things. That is very true. It has taken humanity out of feudalism, which is great. However, we need an actual safety net to reduce inequalities, to give people who have less more, in order to balance out the ones who have less with the ones who have more. And at the end, we all have an even start, because there cannot be inequality if somebody is disadvantaged from the start. It just does not exist.
Thank you, Kalina. Now we'll proceed with the initial responses. Yegor, you have approximately 30 minutes to comment. So when you're ready, you can start.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for your input, and I understand what you're saying. Once again, I really want to point out that social democracies and welfare states are often capitalist states with certain elements of socialism, in that sense, welfare systems. And I really wanted to address the issue with inequality, because we need to distinguish between relative inequality and relative poor, and absolute inequality, absolute poverty in that sense. So what you say refers to relative poverty, relative inequality between people, thus some group compared to another group, while what happened under capitalistic approach is the absolute poverty and absolute inequality decreased drastically. People living beyond the level, like when they can fulfill their basic needs, dropped during the times of globalization and capitalist open markets entering the world, from 36% to 9% only, as the study that was conducted by Austrian researchers shown in 2010, where we can see that relative inequality is definitely an issue, and there's a lot of catching up and working to do. However, people now in the present world, due to open market, due to opportunities to work and earn money, more money, they reduced the gap and they improved their life conditions, initial life conditions that they had to face before that. So, which is a major achievement in that sense. And I do agree that people need to be social and they need to help each other, treat each other, as you said. However, you might know that other animal species do that as well. Do they get a saying in such a discussion, in such a choice? Like, we all know that birds help their children when they're born. They bring them food, and sometimes in other communities, like elephants, they help the injured individuals in that sense. So would that mean that they would choose a welfare state, in your opinion, or rather it's the natural flow of things which shouldn't be put in the system, the whole system, with governmental rule and like when the choices are being made for you in that sense?
Thank you, Egor. Kalina, 3 minutes when you're ready.
I would like to comment on some of the points you made. Thank you for your input. So, to answer your question about the other animals, why do you think they do that? They help others because it makes them more resilient, it makes them stronger, it makes them survive for longer. That is the same reason why we people should in fact do that. On your point of relative and absolute inequalities, inequalities are inequalities. No matter how you look at them, they disadvantage people, no matter if they're relative or absolute. And I think we have gotten to a point in humanity and society in which we have to take care of the less advantaged, just in order to, because the big argument here against socialism is basically it kills entrepreneurship, right? It kills competition. However, competition needs to be balanced out, because you can have somebody who is born in the wrong place in the wrong time, who has the potential to compete, but he is not given the choice to compete. He doesn't have the opportunity to compete while the others do. So on the whole, yes, capitalism has taken many people out of poverty. That is absolutely true. It has taken many absolute continents out of poverty, such as Africa. However, these are unstable regimes which do not have good systems. We have seen some of them fall apart completely and turn into failed states or be run by armed gangs. They do not have good social systems as the ones in Europe, for example. So they're lacking something. I would say that they're lacking this social system. And money is not everything. Obviously, you can take a country out of poverty, but you cannot structure it properly in order to take care of its people.
Thank you, Kalina. Let's start with the open debate. Students, leads, professors can jump in. Yegor, please start. You can answer to each other, approximately 15-minute discussion. Go ahead.
Okay, I really wanted to, and thank you for letting me go first. I really wanted to address the part where you said that it makes like society more resilient if we help each other, and I wanted to ask, what about humans moving away from it? Like, this is a natural, wouldn't you say that this is a natural course of evolution, being individuals and distancing ourselves from that type of a community? This is first thing that I wanted to say. Second thing, my main point in the initial response was about relative and absolute poverty, and not just relative inequality in that sense, because what really matters is like people not being able to afford certain things to them. That's why I was referring to absolute poverty in that sense, that it is decreased drastically. And about your point about African states that were trying to pursue the capitalist ideas, yes, they are unstable right now. Some of them have collapsed, but main reason to that is because they haven't finished the development into the full open market capitalistic economy. They had a lot of input from the government, from the, as you said, warlords that controlled certain parts of market or production or other things that did not allow them to fully evolve into something that is worth pursuing in that sense, and they are on the way to this.
Okay, so about the entrepreneurial people, yes, the people who went from all the countries in the world and went to America, they were the entrepreneurs, they were the exception, they were the adventurous people. However, in order to have those people, to foster these people, you first need a society. You first need people who have shared values. You need a community. So this is my answer to your entrepreneurial question. And these people should also be fostered, obviously, and they should also be supported. On the African case, so is my understanding correct that your solution is more capitalism to these countries? Is that how we're solving the issue?
Yeah, more capitalistic development in a sense. Like continue, go further into the direction of capitalism, into the direction of open market and control over means of production by private individuals, like by individuals, not by the state, or somebody acting as a state.
Okay, that is good. However, how do you deal with the deeply rooted issues of cronyism in these countries? Do you just take away the power from the state and the warlords and just give it to the people?
Well, let's say this is not something you can take away, as you say, but this is a process of natural development. When somebody develops an idea that outperforms the existing system or the existing process, let's say, if somebody finds another way to do things which is cheaper, which is better, the market will lean towards it. Thus, the people who hold power, who hold means of production, who hold the economy will lose, and they will have to adapt and move into that direction as well.
Yeah. If I can jump in, okay, the view that capitalism and therefore progress and economic welfare in general spread because of loners who were entrepreneurial, and they freely decided to be non-conformist and to get into a new way of doing things is a myth. Because at AUBG we have many problems. One of the big problems is that AUBG students don't take enough history courses. They don't study history well, because if you study
You're losing
medieval,
them. You're losing them, Diego.
I'm also a historian, by the way, and if you take medieval and early modern history, for instance, courses in these fields, you will see that the most thriving societies were societies that were not at all individualistic. The communes in medieval Italy. I mean, if Italy was, and the Flanders, by the way, the most urbanized areas in Italy, the Flanders, Germany, were areas that were ruled by communes, by whole communities, which already had democratic practices in which the members of the institutions had to take care of the whole city in general. You know, from the banker, from the richest banker of the Medici family to the poorest people who swept the road, they were all concerned first and foremost with the good of the city, and they were the economic powers of the Middle Ages. Later, I mean, this is something that Max Weber wrote in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. The people who moved to the Americas, to Massachusetts, you know, the Pilgrim Fathers, and the most important economies of early modern Europe, from the Netherlands to Britain, etc., they had a strong Calvinistic outlook, I mean, religious and communitarian outlook, according to which service to the community was the most important thing that they could do. Service to the church, service to the city, etc. And they thrived financially exactly thanks to their social cohesion and social conformism as well. On the other hand, if we see when things went awry, if we want to examine historical periods when everybody experienced serious financial difficulties, consider only the crisis of 1929. Uncontrolled free market economy led to a disaster, to a catastrophe, which then ended up in promoting, the political processes that led to World War II, by the way. And in order to put an end to that catastrophe, welfare policies needed to be implemented in the United States, first and foremost, by President Roosevelt, and later in other countries in Europe after World War II, later. So,
Okay, thank you for bringing up 1929. I would recommend reading economic history. Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz, Monetary History of the United States. Friedman ended up winning Nobel Prize for it. Debunks the Keynesian socialist, Marxist, whatever, myth that 1929, the Great Depression, was a failure of free market capitalism. It came from, I'm sorry to bore you, it came from monetary policy. It came from the American Central Bank, the Federal Reserve. Super short version, again, please don't run away. Super short version was initially monetary policy was too loose, which created a bubble, as it always does. Read your Hayek and Mises, Austrian economists, brilliant. And then, of course, the money ended up flowing into the stock market. That's where the bubble formed. Then the bubble bursts, and the Fed panics, and it reins in the availability of money, the availability of credit. So they do a kind of breakneck, tight monetary policy. So suddenly businesses are grasping for money. There's no money available. So you have the combination of the stock market collapse, which was caused by a bubble, caused by the Fed, combining with credit being cut off too soon, too suddenly, which turns what could have been a moderate downturn into the Great Depression. And Ben Bernanke, the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank, he was at, I think it was a birthday party for Milton Friedman. And he said, and I quote, "You were right. We did it. We, meaning the Fed. We're sorry. And thanks to you, we're not going to do it again." Right? And I hope you guys are planning to bring up the global financial crisis, because I'd love to talk about that. I'd love to talk about monetary policy and bubbles with the GFC. With regards to Italy, one interesting story there from Why Nations Fail, which is economic history, very interesting, by Nobel Prize-winning economists. There's a story there about Venice at its height, and they had an interesting legal system where ambitious young men could go into business with established businessmen, and those businessmen would then fund those young men's ventures, which would typically be to take a ship and to go sail somewhere to sell things, right, to trade. So it was a kind of partnership where the established person would provide the capital while the ambitious up-and-coming person would take the personal risk, right? And this resulted in the elevation of these people who previously had come from modest backgrounds. They were able, acting as ambitious entrepreneurs, they were able to raise themselves up, and then they would join the elite and would take part in the government of the Republic of Venice. And to a great extent, the greatness of Venice was built on this meritocracy, this market-based meritocracy. Where Venice starts to go wrong, at least according to the book, is where the people at the top, they decide, okay, that's enough ambitious young men coming up, we're going to cut it all off, right? So they pass laws ending that previous system, cutting away, using the state to take away the opportunities of young entrepreneurs, because the established powers are always threatened by young entrepreneurs. Kalina is so correct. Thank you so much for saying power can be abused. Thank you, Kalina. I love that you said that, because what is by far the most powerful entity Of course, it's the state. Of course, it's the government, which has, she's quietly dying there. No, you're doing great. Which has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. There's nothing else like it. There's nothing else like it compared to the monopoly on the legitimate use of force. And from that, you can do anything. There's infinite room for abuse. Right? Unfortunately, a lot of people have been Marx-brained, where they think that power comes from money. Right? It's also the fault of Scarface, right? Where they say first you get the money, then you get the power. I think there's women afterwards. Actually, if we're doing rock paper scissors, power beats money. Power always beats, or almost always beats money, right? I'm always happy to talk about Russia endlessly.
Yeah, Kalina and Yegor can jump in as well.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
I can keep going.
May I make 2 points very briefly? You know, Venice as well as Florence before Venice, they had the same practice in Florence at the time of the Medici, the Pazzi, and so. They started to decline when the ruling families in Florence and the ruling class, the patricians in Venice, made a privatistic, capitalistic use of the state. When they forgot that the state had to serve the community, and they made the state serve their own, I would say.
Yes, they abused power. They abused the power of the state, which is why we need to limit the power of the state so that there's less available to abuse.
Or we need to spread, you know, public education, civic education, in order to expand the communitarian, I would say, concern with the common good. When it comes to, the monetary policy, yeah, there were still monetary policies embedded in capitalist economy. And why was the solution the implementation of a bunch of welfare policies under the Roosevelt administration? So why? Why? If free market capitalism was so good that it would not bring to any crisis after 1929, why did the American government go the other way and implement welfare policies which contributed to making America the greatest superpower in the world? Economic, military, and political.
Give students a chance.
Let's give students a chance.
Just a few more minutes on the open discussion, then we move only on professor's layer.
So, because in a lot of cases, good politics, bad economics, good economics, bad politics. So that's why they had to spend a lot of money so that they would keep the voters attracted to them. They are in the disastrous situation. They need to have people support. One of the ways to have people support is to increase governmental spending on people. At the same time, I wanted to address the idea about healthcare and about education. This creates, moral hazard in the modern world. For example, in the countries where we have the welfare state healthcare, like when the state provides healthcare, in a lot of situations when it's free, in a lot of situations we will have enormous queues. People in Canada would be waiting from the contact to the hospital until the treatment, that they would be waiting for 27 weeks because the healthcare is provided on the free basis for the citizens of Canada, which subsidized by the government. Meanwhile, in the private hospitals in the United States, where you go using your insurance, you get treatment immediately. You don't have to wait for that long. Same happened to me. Again, I will return to the story with my leg again. In Russia, I would have to wait for the surgery for 3 months because there's a queue, there's a quota, how much people they accept in a month. While here, I got it done in 3 weeks after coming back to Bulgaria because I was applying for the private hospital and private care.
Well, there is a very easy, very simple answer to that. Some people have to wait 27 weeks. Some people don't have the choice of going and getting insurance and going to the private hospital and getting a scan or getting a surgery. Some people actually don't have that opportunity. You have it. I have it. Most people here have it. Some people don't. That's a very simple answer.
So the answer to that would be people who are in need, who cannot cover their own medical costs, they receive the subsidies from the government, which I was referring to in my open statement. While the people who can sustain the insurance, the private insurance, the governmental insurance, like the one in Zok in Bulgaria, they can get treatment faster because of that. And this is important to distinguish, because what happens when you wait for 27 weeks, sometimes it's not that bad. Okay, if you have a flu, you can wait for 27 weeks, it will go away by then. But if it is something urgent, if it's an urgent surgery that you need to do, you don't have that time. This is a matter of life and death in that sense.
We can move on with the professor's discussion later, then you can answer. 5 to 7 minutes to each professor. Professor Levine starts. As soon as you're ready, sir.
Okay. So I got a WhatsApp message from my mom on Sunday. She was reminding me that it's a very important anniversary. It's our main family holiday. It's the anniversary of us emigrating from Russia to New Zealand. Moving from a country wrecked by socialism to a country built by capitalism. A very nice place to live, trust me. Any other New Zealanders here? No, so I'm the only authority. Fantastic. And the other day I saw something interesting. Anybody know who Hassan Piker is? Yes? Okay, so he's a streamer, kind of low IQ politics streamer, right? And he was at a debate, and he said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the greatest catastrophes of the 20th century. Vladimir Putin, when he said it, he at least had the decency to say one of the greatest geopolitical catastrophes. For Hassan, it's a catastrophe, you know, on par with World War II or the Holocaust, assuming he believes in the Holocaust. I'm guessing not. On par with those that my family got to leave and have a life and build a life in a society where you can work for yourself and towards your happiness, right? To Western socialists like Hassan, who is a millionaire and lives in a mansion, never mind. To them, the experiences of the people who actually had to live under communism, the experiences of the maybe 80 million people murdered by the socialist communist system, those don't matter. We should just shut up and keep our heads down. And I disagree with that, and I find it kind of upsetting. That's one of the reasons why I think it's good to have this discussion. There's apparently a need for it. I guess any kind of wisdom doesn't really, there's a tendency for any kind of wisdom or truth to be forgotten after just 1 or 2 or at most 3 generations, and we have to keep rediscovering the really important truths, such as the key to Western prosperity. Most of our prosperity was built before the welfare states were introduced. They were introduced using the prosperity, spending that prosperity. Up until the point when we ran out of money in the 70s and 80s and had to, including in New Zealand, had to elect free market governments who saved us. But then afterwards, we again kind of forgot the lessons and have been drifting back towards socialism and welfarism, and now facing all kinds of very unpleasant problems. But back to political economy, because that's more my field. Power can be abused, to quote Kalina. Yes, absolutely. And the state is where the power is concentrated. Even if we make the state very small with very low taxes, it will still by very, very far be by far the most powerful entity. Do you want this entity there just waiting to be captured by interest groups, by people who will privatize it, use it for their own private interest? That's a very dangerous thing to do. I saw in the news in Hungary, you might have seen that the opposition won for the first time in a long time, Peter Magyar. He's talking about closing the state television company. Why? Because that was abused by the Orban regime. They took taxpayer-funded television and turned it into what Magyar characterizes it as a kind of North Korea, right? Anything that you put into the government's hands can then be turned against you for the interests of whichever gang manages to capture control of the government. To take the Russian example, what's one of the very first things that Vladimir Putin did when he became president? He went after the two leading media barons, Gusinsky and Berezovsky, neither of which had been particularly, let's say, pleasant people, right? And both of their media empires had been flawed in their own ways. However, Gusinsky in particular, his media had criticized the government all throughout the 90s. They did real reporting from the Chechen War, for instance. Okay? What did Putin do? He turned the state against them. He threatened to send them to prison. He made them a deal where they went into exile, lost most of their property. The property was absorbed either directly by the state, particularly by the national gas company, Gazprom. We have a Gazprom media now. How does that make sense? It's bad economics. It's perfect politics, right? And you can go watch the Russian media and see what it's become now. It's literally psychotic, right? Just a few years later, richest man in Russia, a man named Khodorkovsky, starts talking too much about corruption, starts looking like he might want to run for president. What happens? He's the richest. Power comes from money, we're told, right? Marx brained. No, I'm sorry. Power comes from power, and if you have power, you can very easily attain money. Right? Did Putin become president because he was rich? He wasn't. He was from a very, very poor, basic background, spent his entire life working in government, secret policeman, St. Petersburg mayor's office, onto the Kremlin, right? He captured power. And then he used the power to capture the economy. So Khodorkovsky loses his fortune. His oil company is absorbed by the Russian state oil company, run by one of Putin's cronies, and Khodorkovsky goes to prison. You have to be if you want to build democracy, if you want to keep your democracy, you have to be very, very careful about the power of the state. And if you look at rankings of the most free market economies, the most free market countries in the world, among the top 30, it's mostly, almost exclusively liberal democracies. At the bottom, the least free market systems, it's places like North Korea, Sudan, Cuba.
Thank you, Professor. As soon as you're ready, sir, 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, please. Yeah, I agree. Power can be and is abused indeed, but I still don't see the link between the existence of welfare policies and the fact that power is abused. I see the link between the existence of strong corporations, capitalistic lobbies, politicians connected to oligarchs, and this is the case of Putin, and abuse of power in a privatistic way. I don't see the connection between the protection of the rights of the bulk of the community and abuse of power. Because they're two different issues, in my opinion. And abuse of power takes place easier, actually, in countries that, actually, in my opinion, do not really implement welfare policies. I'm sorry, but today's United States is an example. Trump's United States is an example of this. Putin's Russia is an example of this. Bulgaria can also be taken as an example of this, because what Yegor said about his experience is episodical, but I'll make a distinction, a difference, actually, a comparison between Bulgaria and my home country. I know a lot of sick people in Italy, people who have serious forms of cancer or leukemia, including relatives of mine. They are all being taken good care by quite an efficient national health system in Italy. I can tell you, they don't have to wait for long. You can be the poorest person in the country. You are cured even if you have the rarest disease in the world. Here in Bulgaria, where actually a similar welfare policy is not implemented, they will let you die. That's the reason why you have boxes in supermarkets, grocery stores. Help this little girl. Give one level of donation for an operation in France or Germany. Otherwise, she will die. So if we want to talk of episodical issues, I mean, this is another example. Talking of what I have prepared, I want to start with something that was not written by a bunch of communists or socialists, but I'll tell you by whom. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood. Do you know where this is from, where these words are from? A document approved by the United Nations in 1948, Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. By the way, the computer is off, I cannot see the time, sorry. And, I mean, the discourse on right is not something that originated in 1948 thanks to the UN. I mean, it originated at least among the ancient Romans. The word use indeed means right, but in the early modern period, probably the most important theorist of rights was my friend John Locke. And as you know, in Two Treatises of Government, he wrote about natural rights to life, property, and freedom. And he characterized these natural rights as what we would define negative rights, rights of non-interference. Given that you have a right to life, property, and freedom, I don't have a right to infringe upon these rights of yours. So I have a duty to not infringe upon these rights of yours. But in Locke's narrative in Two Treatises, natural rights correspond to positive rights. If you have a right to life, property, and freedom, then I have a duty to preserve not only my life, property, and freedom, but also the life, property, and freedom of the rest of humankind, of the rest of the community. This is a sort of communitarian element in Locke's thought that is often disregarded, and often Locke is depicted as a kind of hardcore libertarian, which he was not. Make a reference to an author that Kalina too has mentioned, Azione, about whom I teach in my classes. A proper authentic community can be characterized as a community that takes care of the good, of the needs, of the rights of all its members. Then there are, partial communities. Partial communities are, communities in which only a portion of the populace's rights and needs are being taken care of. Ilya is right when he says this is the case in communist countries, North Korea, it was the case in the USSR, it is the case in China nowadays, and I would say it is no accident that China as a capitalist economy, it's largely integrated in world capitalism while having a socialist system. But this is the case in communities in which there is free market politics, in which you have no sort of welfare policies, in which you have essentially power in the hands of people linked or even being part of what we would define as economic elites. Noam Chomsky, I think is a famous linguist and also political thinker, we can say. He has pointed out, a few years ago, a dozen years ago, that power is drifting towards corporations that are able to influence politics and not only the economy of a country, and they are largely unaccountable because it's not the people who vote for the leaders of corporations. These corporations also have their strict hierarchy, according to which there are those who dominate over others. And the funny thing is that when it comes to free market, as socialism says, we can say that free market is only for the poor. On the other hand, it is a socialism for the rich, because the wealthy use free market rhetoric to justify imposing greater economic risk upon the lower classes, upon those who cannot pay for their medical services, for their medical care, upon those who cannot send their children to good schools, for instance, while, the wealthy are insulated from the rigors of the market imposed on the poor. And they are insulated because of the political and economic advantages that they can afford. Economic advantages are clear. Political advantages, what does it mean? It means that when, things are okay, they will not contribute as they should. When things are not okay for the capitalists, for those who lead these corporations, then the taxpayers are supposed to bail them out. And this happens over and over again. Why? Exactly because in this kind of political communities and societies and economies, those who actually manage to abuse the power and they use the power for their own benefits are those who hold the capital. Are not poor people coming from the bottom, or if they are poor people like Putin, who came from the ranks of the KGB, they are people who have managed to have the right links with those who govern the economy of a nation. And now I will go back to liberal thinkers because we know about Karl Marx's criticism of these dynamics, but I want to say that even TJ, Thomas Jefferson, he said that if we make banking institutions, money and corporations have such a huge influence on the politics of the state, this would lead to a restoration of absolutism, a new absolutism by those who hold economic power. What is the solution? Well, we can take more. I know the time is over. I think we need democratic institutions and bottom-up practices, thanks to which it is the people from the local level to the regional level to the continental level to a sort of world federation that would finally rule, not those who manage to occupy the ruling positions and abuse power. That's it.
Thank you. Open interaction, 5 to 7 minutes. Sure.
So really,
Professor.
or only professor. Oh, okay.
Professor Solomon.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
You're gonna later. Yeah.
With regards to Putin, so when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine happened and the West placed sanctions on the Russian economy, the hope was that the Russian oligarchs who saw their net worth being cut, right, quite drastically, they would pressure or ideally remove Putin, right? But that's not how the system works. Money's not that powerful. It's the other way around. Yes, Putin, partly he did get into power by scamming Berezovsky, one of the oligarchs, but also convincing a number of other very powerful men, including Yeltsin, men who were not oligarchs. Once he got into power, he was not beholden to oligarchs. He was picking and choosing who would get to be an oligarch. If you were not following orders, you were out, right? If, like Abramovich, you followed orders, then okay, you got to continue to be a billionaire and, buy Chelsea football team, right? At the same time, he created new oligarchs. He took friends from his childhood, people who had close to zero understanding of business, and he made them into billionaires. How? Because the Russian state pays for all kinds of things, the wonderful things that our colleagues like, education, construction, that's opportunities for contracts, okay? That's a great opportunity to funnel billions and billions and billions to your friends, and then you're expecting that they in turn will use that money in any way that you desire. By some accounts, Putin is the richest man in the world now. Is he actually? It doesn't really matter because Russia has no property rights, as it's never had property rights, not under the Tsars, not under the communism. The leader, whether general secretary or Tsar, has always been able to treat the population and their property as his own patrimony. If Putin tells an oligarch, build me a palace, they will build the palace. They have no real choice. Lobbying. A terrible, terrible thing called lobbying. Why does it happen? Do businesses just love lobbying? Do they love spending so much money on lawyers? No, they're forced to do it by the government, which interferes in business. Microsoft used to have a very small presence in Washington, D.C. Then in the 90s, the congressmen, the senators, they felt a little bit neglected by Microsoft. They started talking about breaking it up, accusing it of being a monopoly, forcing Bill Gates to sell it off. What does Bill Gates do? He starts writing big checks to lobbyists. If you want to get business out of government, get government out of business. People respond to incentives. Chomsky, I don't know if I even want to talk about Chomsky. Do I bring up Jeffrey Epstein? Do I bring up his denial of the Cambodian genocide? I don't know. UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, not written by communists. Wrong. I know who wrote it. I talk about it in class. They remember. There was a committee chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt. It included a representative from Stalin's Soviet Union. They, of course, pushed for these bullshit social freedoms so that they could then say, as they did for decades, oh, you guys accuse us of not having freedoms, but we have free healthcare and free this and free that, so we're freer than you are. Rights, negative versus positive. Isn't it so weird that we have this conception of rights where for some people to have rights, other people's rights have to be violated? To me, I'm not the philosopher, but to me that seems like a contradiction. Purely so-called negative rights, which is the right, the freedom from coercion, that has no contradictions. My freedom from coercion does not limit any of your rights unless you think you have a right to coerce me, to force me to do things for you. Socialism for the rich. I brought graphs. Guess how much income tax the evil 1% in the US pay? Or specifically, guess what portion of the total federal income tax that the government collects, guess how much of that comes from the top 1%? Should be around 0, right? We keep hearing the rich don't pay taxes. We need to tax the rich because we're not taxing the rich. It's over 40%. 1% of the population is paying for 40% of the government, okay? The top 5% is paying for 61% of the government. The bottom 50%, half the country, they pay 3%. They only contribute 3% to the overall federal budget. Excuse me, socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor? You have half the country free riding on the other half. Is that healthy for your democracy? And what's the what kind of discourse, what kind of democratic discourse do you end up with? If somebody says, hey, maybe we should ease the burden a little bit on the most productive people in the country, you get accused of, oh, tax cuts for the rich. You want grandma to die of cancer. I think we can all agree that buying votes is bad for democracy. Do you know what the biggest vote buying scheme is? This. Taxation. You tax the top 5%. You as a politician can completely ignore their interests. You use that to buy votes from the other 55% of the population. That's vote buying. You can jump in. Yeah. I would much prefer people buy votes at least with their own money. For God's sake, at least buy the votes with your own money. And not my money.
On the other hand, the fact that you say 50-55% of the population in the US pays only 3% of taxes means that 50-55% must be in a very bad economic situation, financial situation. If they eventually have to pay so few taxes. I would prefer to have, a more balanced situation in which more people are in such a situation they can contribute more than 3% in taxation. When it comes to Putin, yeah, it happened in Russia. Why not in Sweden? Why not in Norway, which are countries that have a solid, long-living welfare tradition? How come in Russia? Or sometimes, we say the same things in Italy. I mean, in Italy there is corruption, or in Bulgaria there is corruption. How come not in the Netherlands? How come not in Denmark? Countries that have a solid and long-lasting welfare tradition. So let's not confuse, what is the lack of a community spirit, of a concern with the common good, with the welfare system. Because if it happened in Russia, probably it is because having lived first below the Tsars, and then first under the Tsars, and then under a communist socialist dictatorship, the people in Russia did not develop a concern for the common good as something that is part of their identity, as something that they absorbed. They even eventually regarded the common good as a sort of imposition from the top. And individualism spread, unfortunately. This is not the case in societies that conversely have a long tradition of taking care of the community as a whole. Why not in a Scandinavian country, for instance? When it comes to the UN, okay. I know very well that there were, of course, socialist countries that were members of the UN, there were the representatives, but these Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was approved with no votes against. Only 8 countries abstained, and 2 did not vote. So it means that there was an agreement. And regardless of who wrote it, who were not, for the large majority, they were not communists or socialists. For the large majority, those who actually approved this, there were countries belonging to the so-called free world. Can we say that it's wrong? Is it wrong to say that everybody has, the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself? That everybody has enough food, clothing, housing, medical care, security in the event of unemployment or disability, whatever. Is it wrong? Is it something wrong? I don't know, to be honest. Then rights. Yeah, I gotta be honest. Here this makes me think of Isaiah Berlin. Isaiah Berlin wrote about negative freedom, positive freedom, but he says something important. He said, here in this article I'm writing about freedom, but I don't forget that there are things more important, there are rights more important than freedom. There are rights such as social justice, such as to have the minimum to live and to survive. Therefore, Andy posed the problem of freedom in connection to the problem of coercion, to the question of coercion. And Berlin was certainly not a communist. He was another guy who left, what later became, who left actually. He lived he was born in Riga, as far as I remember. And he and his family moved to the UK when he was still a very young boy, essentially. Isaiah Berlin said it clearly. He said that I would accept a certain degree of coercion as long as it is for good purposes, saving the lives of other people who otherwise would die if I were not coerced to pay taxes, if I were not coerced to assist them. And this is something that not communists, although it's not Marx or Stalin who said so, but John Stuart Mill says it clearly. You have an obligation, he is a liberal author, you have an obligation to assist. In some cases, not only your action can harm others, but even your inaction, failure to pay what you owe to the community when it comes to taxes, failure to stop and help somebody who's had an accident, for instance, that's one of the examples that he makes. So, to be coerced for reasons superior to your freedom is not necessarily an evil. It's not necessarily an evil. If I see a person, in my country, for instance, in Italy, there is this law. If you see a person who has had an accident, you don't have the option. You are not free to decide what to do. You have to assist. Otherwise, you go to jail. If you're the only person who is around and can give CPR or call the police or an ambulance, you must do it. Because if there are cameras who see that you are not doing it and you take the freedom to walk away, you go to jail. And you can claim no freedom of movement and freedom of choice in that case, because there are situations in which coercion makes sense. Same thing with being coerced to contribute to the community to the best, in the best way as you can, in the most significant way as you can, even when it comes to taxation. There was another point.
Sorry, Professor.
Anyway, there was another point, but anyway.
Yeah. Professor Lin, do you have a short answer because we have to move on with the other section, 1 to 2 minutes max?
There are no short answers. Russians as individualistic, that's very interesting. I haven't heard that a lot.
If there were more cohesive, they would react.
I think Richard Pipes, the great anti-communist historian who turned out to be right about everything, I think he put down Russia's central problem is historically as the absence of property rights, right? The absence of respect for the rights to one's property. And from there grows tyranny, right? From there grows grotesque abuse by the sovereign of the population and of their property. In the Scandinavian countries, in the Nordics countries, yes, they have a wonderful capitalist market tradition leading up to this period where they got so rich that okay, they could start spending a lot on welfare. And then the welfare states ran into trouble economically and they had to cut them back at least to some extent. Right, but these values, these beautiful values of caring about each other, they grew up before the welfare state, generations before the welfare state. Right? Same in the US. You were talking about early colonial United States, how people took care of each other. Were they being forced to? Was there a welfare state? Not at all. Very interesting assumption here that people will not take care of each other, they will not help each other unless there's a gun to their head forcing them, unless the state is forcing them to take care of each other. I'm not arguing that people shouldn't take care of each other. I'm in favor of kindness and helping and community. I'm in favor of doing it without a bureaucracy, without politicians regulating how we do it, without politicians enforcing fake generosity, crowding out. What government does is it crowds out any area that it moves into, it pushes everything out of it. That's what the welfare state does. Before the welfare state, there were many mutual aid societies. People would get together, they would form clubs, they would form brotherhoods, they would form organizations, they would help each other out through church, right? All those wonderful civil society groups that de Tocqueville talks about. They existed before the welfare state. Then the welfare state appears, it crowds all of this out. People start to see the government as the parent, the government as the friend, the government as the social network. They move away from community. You have an atomization. You have a society that becomes lonely, fragmented. Robert Putnam, bowling alone, right? This is what you end up with because the government takes over the business of kindness.
Thank you, Professor. With that, we close the professor's discussion.
I have a question.
A historical, sorry, I've done research on European travelers in the US in the time of Jefferson. They were surprised by the amount of taxes that people had to pay in states like Massachusetts or Pennsylvania. They said they're quite heavy compared to European taxes. Why so much? And they were quite...
Well, like 3%?
Quite heavy. No, back in TJ's time, in Thomas Jefferson's time.
Yes, but heavy by the standards of the time would be like 3%.
Oh, I don't know, but still heavier and still
by the standards of the time.
1 second, used for public services, for the public good. I mean, I'm talking of Italian, Swedish travelers, French travelers who traveled in the US, and they were surprised by the way in which people were literally forced to give money to the state and the way money was spent quite well.
I just want to give more time for the audio questions from the audience. Go ahead.
I have a question for Professor.
Sorry, you have a question from the audience? You're not the audience. Sorry. All right. Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, so you said you support a liberal democracy style capitalist society, right?
Yes.
I believe choosing Singapore as an example contradicts this argument entirely.
He chose Singapore, first of all. Secondly...
Yeah, let me address that though.
Singapore.
If you want the exact wording of what I said,
I also have no idea what he was on about when he talked about birds. Just for the record, I'm not teaching about bird democracy or whatever that was.
It was not the system of the country, rather than market liberal capitalism, not the country system itself. In total, I think you might got that wrong from what I was saying.
It's not a very pre-capitalist type of society either, because the state has a very strong control over its companies, or has a big role in playing a direction of how the economy is going to go. It's been classified, not entirely, but it's really compared to a state capitalist.
Can you provide specific examples though? Because from what I heard, there is an open trade. What I was mentioning, there's what I was referring to mandatory savings account as of insurance for citizens, and that insurance is allocated at the time of need, like any private insurance would be, and like the welfare there is limited in that sense. And again, the authoritarian regime is most likely in place because it is a city-state. It is very submissive towards such an authority, such a system.
I would argue about that point, but it's not really that main. Capitalism is the main thing. Singapore does use international trade for sure. That's what its entire economy is based on. But companies inside Singapore have really strict guidelines that they have to pass. Usually they have to kind of align with the government. It's a very controlled capitalist society. That surely externally it's making use of its geographic position, but internally it's very controlled.
It's good that we're not limited only to the inner market, right? And there is an excess of international companies in that sense, because this is what the world and like interdependence in the world is about. Not only local companies, which might be constrained by the rule of law, it's also important to talk in what way it is constrained by the rule of law in that sense, because they retain their property. It cannot be taken by force by the government from the companies nor from the individuals in that sense.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm looking at my phone, but I have two questions for the capitalist side. First, about the welfare state in Scandinavian labor, I think mentioned it. However, I think that they're not a good example of like a purely capitalist country because a welfare state is a well-working social system. And for example, America is also a state that also has a country and their welfare is, let's say, a lot less significant for working. And the example you gave, if you agree that our in America we pay about my insurance, but the specific insurance that we chose doesn't cover your surgery or doesn't cover like some part of the surgery. For example, the anesthesia, because of rare stories that if
Thank you.
covered by insurance, some like small detail isn't enough to like thousands of dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this up. First, to address the welfare state claim. Yes, they are. The Scandinavian countries are welfare states. However, once again, their welfare system is built on the money that they earned while being more inclined to capitalism and open market in that sense, and they still rest on these pillars, like to collect taxes to fund the welfare state in that situation. About your question about insurance in the United States, this happens because the insurance, private insurance specifically, is very heavily constrained by United States law. This is the example of welfare state intervention, of the welfare intervention towards the natural processes. That's why the insurance story is so complicated for private users. That's why a lot of people rely on the insurance that is provided by their work. About their involvement in policies and everything, because they are learning their lessons. 2008 global financial crisis happened because of the welfare policies, because of the policy to fund cheap loans to people with questionable backgrounds, with questionable ability to repay the loans for houses. The bubble burst afterwards due to, and the bubble happened in the first place due to the welfare policies. Same goes for the recent years during the COVID. Biden administration spent a huge amount of money paying people who were unemployed under a certain percent, earned under a certain amount of money. Okay.
Okay. Please, next question. And I would prefer for you to choose the socialists to answer. Yes, please.
Well, it's again for the capitalism.
We're just more interesting. We're always more interesting.
As an American, this healthcare thing is really kind of caught my curiosity here because, two things. How would you explain capitalism was the determinant of the triumph of the American healthcare system, given the enormous difference in life expectancy between rich and poor? That's the first thing. And second, how would you explain, phenomena like wage mangione for crying out loud?
Socialists murdering people? Is that new? Really? Read history books. That's what they do. But no, in terms of the U.S. insurance system, which is very, very messy, that itself is, to a great extent, a product of state policies and incentives created by state policies. I think it actually goes back to FDR and wage controls, because which incentivized companies, instead of competing over labor through wages, they then had to find a way around it. So they started competing over workers by offering various other benefits, right? Company car, health insurance, and so on. These benefits, I think, are also lower taxed or even not taxed. So there's an incentive structure that was set up and that has morphed and developed over the decades that produced this very strange kind of beast where it's a system that revolves around the insurance industry, which in turn is heavily regulated by the state, right? And creates, and I mean, it creates a lot of distortions, right? Because people, I mean, with regards to costs, part of the issue is who pays the costs? It's the insurance companies, right? So the healthcare providers themselves, they're not competing on the basis of price, right? If you have insurance and you need a surgery and the insurance covers it, you're not going to pay attention to how much it's going to cost. The provider might not even tell you how much it's going to cost. So health costs end up ballooning. The whole system is messed up, right? And it's very far from a market-based system.
I was there when they were creating the so-called healthcare reform. At the beginning.
Yeah, Barack Obama,
Excuse me.
great
Excuse
social
me.
democrat, great welfarist.
All right. Please, next question for the socialist side. Yes, please.
So I don't think you got enough time to elaborate on Soviet Union and how it was presented as an example of socialism, which I don't think holds full water because it clearly had an elite society, which took.
That's what happens.
Well, it does, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, your side stuff.
Yeah, how was the elite society? How was the elite called? Right, the bourgeoisie. Unfortunately, because they essentially behaved in the same way as the bourgeois behaved in capitalist societies. You can just read 1984 by Orwell, and you will understand the dynamics that led, to this, to what happened back then. And once again, I would say that the problem over there was the fact that once again public power was used in a privatistic way, not, for the good of the population. And exactly what Marx wanted to abolish, private property, was actually the main reason why these people wanted to, because it's true that they had power, but they used their power also in order to gain property. It happened in the Soviet Union. It happened in Bulgaria too, by the way, because probably you remember Professor Kalbecheva. She did research on this topic, and she also invited other scholars who had done research on this topic. But shortly before the fall of communism, of the real socialist regimes, what happened? A lot of people understood that with Gorbachev's perestroika, something bad was going to happen. Something bad for them was going to happen. And many members of the nomenclatura from Bulgaria brought their money to banks in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. And it was not their money, it was actually money of the state that they had appropriated. Okay, they brought this money to Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Later, what happened? A few years after, this is what I remember from these guest lectures and lectures organized by Evelina. What happened? It happened, and then this money returned during the transition. And this is why those who held economic and political power in Bulgaria in the 90s, and maybe still nowadays, as far as I understand, are essentially people connected with former communist bureaucrats, former communist members of the nomenclatura. And as you can see, power and money always go hand in hand. But why? Lack of social spirit, lack of civic spirit, lack of I don't know how to call it, of a good, of a good care of the public good, of the common interest, etc. So
lack of bourgeois values that are born out of a market society.
Healthy bourgeois values, healthy. If they are the bourgeois values of the
He talked about the Soviet Union. I have to talk.
Yeah.
It must happen.
Next question, please.
Oh.
Yes,
question maybe for both groups. We focus more a lot on the prosperity and wealth, but they are not necessarily synonymous with the happiness. Having the maximum possibility of making maximum number of people happy. Which idea do you think, as an idea, let's put the practice that has been so far case aside, as as an idea, which one will make more people, maximum number of people in the society happy? Socialism or capitalism?
Let's do both. A minute and a half to each side. All right? Do you want to start?
Capitalism, spoiler. Yeah, there are polls done on life satisfaction. It correlates pretty strongly with GDP size. Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, I'm not in favor of, I mean, for me, the size of the GDP is not the most important thing. For me, the most important thing is human flourishing, right? And I think in a free society where you can work to succeed or to fail on the basis of your own merits, where you can take risks, I think you're much more likely to be happy than in a society where you have this looming state that is a kind of quasi-parent figure sucking up the social energy, sucking up the resources, creating a welfare dependency where people can't imagine doing anything else, right? I think it's kind of depressing under socialism. It's boring.
Yeah. So do you want to live in the system where you choose for yourself how much to consume, what to do, where to work, where to live? Or do you want to be in the system where you're told where you live, how long do you need to wait for this place where you can live, how much of butter or milk you can consume daily because, you know, it is being reallocated in the different regions? Like, I think the answer is obvious. It's the first option, which is capitalism.
Thank you.
You can go first.
A minute and a half.
I will answer with the story of a friend of mine. I have a good friend in Italy who was at high school with me. Andrea is his name. He was not such a good student at high school. No one would believe that he would succeed in life. He graduated with an average grade from high school. If Andrea was born in the US instead of being born in Italy, he would not have become one of the top heart surgeons in the world. Okay, because he was enabled to go to university because he did not have to pay exorbitant tuition fees. He got, you know, not a lot of help, you know, but although he came from a working class family, and he could study because in Italy universities are state funded. There are not exorbitant tuition fees, so anybody can try. When he enrolled in the School of Medicine, we understood that if he was not a very good student at our high school, it was because maybe he was not good at Greek, Latin, philosophy, history, but when it comes to the medical science, he proved to be a sort of genius, and today is one of the top heart surgeons operating on newborn babies, infants, babies who are younger than 2. He is also invited to hospitals in the US, in England, and elsewhere because he's an authority in the field. Now, I mean, this story proves that if you have support from the bottom in a welfarist system, you can become whoever you want and you can benefit the community. Without the Italian welfare state, a lot of babies would be dead nowadays because Andrea would not have studied medicine and would not have become a great neurosurgeon.
Thank you.
That's it.
And if I can add something?
Very quickly, please. Go ahead.
Very quickly, you keep on saying we're Marxist-brained and we're brainwashed. However, the way capitalists look at a welfare state is basically as a burden. It's basically as somebody, you said it yourself, putting a gun next to your head and telling you, if you don't care, then I'm going to shoot you. Well, so what are we supposed to do? In a welfare state, the state has the power and it does have the burden of taking care of its own people. If it's not the state, then who? So the welfare state, obviously, because it takes care of its people. It's not a burden. It's a privilege for people to take care of each other, and we don't have another alternative.
Thank you. Now, the last part is going to be very quick. We have a closing statements. Yegor, you have, let's say, 1 minute, and Kalina, 1 minute, just to wrap up the whole discussion, and we're good to go. As soon as you're ready.
Don't talk about birds.
Not this time, yeah.
Or only talk about birds.
Yeah, so I want to finish up again with what I said in the beginning. In my opinion, the best system that could help society survive and thrive in that sense would be capitalism with, as I mentioned before, private ownership, of means of production, protection of property rights, voluntary exchange between free individuals, decentralized coordination. through prices of what to produce, when to produce, how to produce, and the freedom of individuals to profit. And there were a lot of aspects that we could also talk about in that sense. For example, that capitalism, because people tend to earn more money to generate profit, provides innovation. Phones that we're using to speak to our friends, film this whole debate, are the ultimate result of capitalism, of people competing in the market, competing, like different corporations competing due to the need for profit.
Thank you. Kalina, 1 minute, as soon as you're ready.
I only have one statement and one question for everyone here. My first statement is thank you for mentioning Tocqueville. That was very nice of you. He also predicted what's going to happen in the US, the capitalist hegemon. He predicted that there's going to be extreme individualism, disassociation, and desensitization. That's exactly what is happening in the United States because of extreme individualism, because people don't care about each other, because they all want to be the person who's going to make the most money and who's going to be most successful and who's going to be the most satisfied with everyone around them. And they want to be the best. So they become desensitized to everything. They have no empathy. They become, scientifically, there has been so many studies that are saying that more and more people in the United States are becoming psychopaths. So that is one very good side effect of capitalism, I guess. The other one is extreme drug addiction. Also, if you want to reference exactly where I got that from, it is from Bruce K. Alexander. So my question for everyone is basically, if the state has all the power, let's put aside the money, okay? If the state has all the power, is it not the state's job to take care of the people, or whose job is it? Are we all supposed to pay for it with our own money, with my own money, not the taxpayers' money? If I don't have, the opportunity to pay for it with my own money, who is supposed to take care of the people?
Thank you. As a closing remark, we can move to the next slide. I want to thank both sides, Yegor, Professor Levin, Kalina, Professor Uchi, for participating. Next, yes, now you can fill out the form, and maybe your views have changed. And if not, at least I hope this debate sparked an interest in thinking about such issues that are extremely important. I want to say the following. Yapping Americano stands for the freedom of speech, freedom of discussion, and this is why we conduct such panels. As far as I know, there's no single time in the last few years of AUBG that some organization, which is not a club, we are not sponsored by AUBG, has done something similar. Professors and students communicating and speaking on such important issues with an audience like this. We can go to the next slide. In connection with this, as I mentioned, we are not sponsored, and we still have to produce more discussions like this, as well as podcasts, interviews, and other episodes. I would ask you, if you have a few cents, to support the freedom of speech on campus and to support what we're doing here. I want to say a big thank you to the Yapping Americano team who made it all possible. Please, a big round of applause.
Do we get a cut of that? Well, they shouldn't. They're socialists, but we're capitalists. We expect our piece.
Is this for donations?
Yes, donations.
Okay. No cash. I mean, I'm like my grandma.
Cash, okay. Cash, okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. That's the end. Thank you.